Houston, east side, west side, north side, south side. I need all of you guys to focus and listen clearly on what we speak here about today. Okay? There was an event some years back before a lot of us was here called the Atlanta Child Murders. And this gentleman here is Sir Mr. Abati Doe. EmmettAbatiDoe. This gentleman is a firm structure in the community here in Houston, Texas as a whole. Okay? So, focus. Don't change the channel. Don't worry about what you are watching, because today we're here to enlighten you concerning this history, so this next generation doesn't let these same mistakes be repeated. Okay? Mr. Abati, would you care to introduce yourself, sir?
Yes, I'm Emmett Abati Doe, and I happen to have lived in Atlanta for 9 years. So when the story about the killings occurred, in fact, I had recently been in Atlanta visiting, and about a year or so before that event began. But let's put this in context. What happened was in 1978, it could have been earlier, by many years. No one really knows, because no one was paying any attention. No one was keeping count. No one was recognizing that a large number of young children, predominantly male, were showing up missing and then showing up dead, being found days later or months later or years later, dead. Most of them died from strangulation, gunshot, violent blow to the head. It was clear that many of them were sexually mutilated, molested. So it wasn't until the numbers grew so large, and this community of mothers who were victims, and they couldn't get the authorities to acknowledge what was happening to their children, or more important to them, who was responsible for what was happening to their children, and to stop it. So the authorities and the official apparatus of government ignored these mothers and their pleas, and the bodies and the tally kept rising. And then the awareness and the reaction and the blowback from the black community mounted as well. So there were a lot of forces that came together that forced what became the governmental response, known as the task force, a governmental task force by federal dollars under the George Bush administration, that created this official standalone team of investigators to solve or to address and stop and apprehend those responsible for these killings. But a little bit of background information, I think it's very important to note, is that this was not done as a result of the parents pleading or the mounting number of victims, dead children. It happened as a result of police officers and former police officers who were just disgusted with how poorly the official apparatus of law enforcement were working, and they decided that they were going to create an organization to investigate. And they announced publicly in support of the parents that this group of retired and active police officers were going to be the ones to take this problem on and stop the killing of these children. Well, in response to that, that's where all of a sudden these millions of dollars were directed to basically prevent this from happening, and the government to regain control of a situation that I think they were responsible for in the beginning.
Mr. Abati, one question. Everything you just explained, where do you come in?
I'm in this picture because of several things. I lived at ground zero of where all of this activity was going on. And I left Atlanta in 1974. Okay. Had I lived in the same location, my son could have been one of the victims. Okay?
No good.
And I am a person who has been very much involved in political activity that's odd and different, in that I'm interested in the things that the traditional black leadership doesn't have the balls to take a look at, or they choose to ignore. And I get involved with that.
Do you plan on going into politics?
No, I've already done that.
Silent partner. You're a silent, deadly force.
Well, I don't know about deadly yet, but some people feel I am a force to be reckoned with. Okay.
You're a Purple Heart recipient.
Well, that was as someone said. I was just very lucky that I did find myself in a colonial war, in a colonial army in Vietnam, and
thank you.
And the Patriots, who were the Vietnamese, fighting to liberate themselves from an invading army. I picked up a couple of wounds as a result of that, and I ain't mad at them because they were doing what we need to learn how to do. Okay, so
nice.
Also my involvement in the media. I have been in radio talk show. For my first radio talk show was in 1969 in Atlanta on Ring Radio. And in fact, it was reported that one of my shows had a response only equal to the day that the Kennedy assassination occurred.
Wow.
It was that engrossing or controversial, whatever.
You're very involved with feelings about this Atlanta child murders. What did you want to convey to the audience concerning why you're emotionally attached to this subject?
I love black people, and I love black children. They are our future. And we talk about that as a people. We know, but talk about the children and stuff. But so often that's BS. When the rubber meets the road, we are very neglectful of our children because we've been trained and taught to think that we're individuals and we're only interested in ourselves and we're only interested in what affects us.
Right.
But I have had, since I got back from Vietnam, a mission. And I felt very ashamed, honestly, to have participated in a colonial war, to put those people back into colonialism. It had nothing to do with their freedoms. It was about subjugating them as the French had subjugated them and the Vietnamese defeated the French.
What is subjugate?
Subjugation means that they were going to be put back in slavery. They're going to be put back into enslavement.
So subjugation is not good.
Subjugation is not good, okay?
Okay.
And that's what those people had resisted historically. And one of the reasons why they killed Dr. King is if you listen to Dr. King's very late messages, he talked about the history of the people of Vietnam, and he talked about them with a lot of admiration. He talked about when the people, Ho Chi Minh,
Ho Chi Minh.
when they had declared their independence.
Who is the Ho Chi Minh?
Ho Chi Minh was the revolutionary leader of the Vietnamese people, the Vietnamese revolutionary struggle against the French.
Okay.
Against the French colonial power.
And you was over there beating up on them.
And I was over there beating up on them. Okay? But I didn't understand that, folks. I mean, honest to goodness, I didn't understand I was on the wrong side. Because if you remember, in 1967, black people were catching all kinds of hell here in America by white supremacy. Okay? And it was white supremacy that was messing over the Vietnamese. It was white supremacy that was trying to put those people back into subjugation. But I didn't have the sophistication, I didn't have the background to understand the connection.
Right.
But being there and experiencing the racism by white soldiers against black soldiers and officers, and they haven't told that story yet because they don't want to, the type of racism that black people are subjected to in the military. I don't care whether it's Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, or Boy Scout, okay? If there are white men there and black men there, black men are going to be messed over the same way they messed over any place that they exist in the United States of America.
Is that how you feel about, is that how you feel about today?
There is no difference. Today is the same as yesterday.
Today is the same as yesterday.
They just do it differently.
There's racism in all branches of the military.
In every branch of the military, when blacks, but they don't talk about it because you see, we have been brainwashed and conditioned and forced into what they call the economic draft. And the economic draft is that because you can't find a job and because pressure is on you to feed your family, feed your face, feed your children, et cetera, and avoid going to jail for not paying child support, you know, you up and volunteer to become a soldier. But actually what you're doing is that you're being recruited because you can't feed your face and get a job into a mercenary army. America no longer has a citizen army. America now has a mercenary army. And that's why the presidents don't go to the cemeteries and don't go to when the bodies are coming in. And everyone was mad at George Bush for not, honoring the dead coming back from various wars because they're mercenaries.
Okay.
They're paid killers. And and it's not the same thing as when you're a citizen army that we once had.
Right.
And now they talk about contracts, that soldiers now have contracts. Well, a citizen army, you don't have contracts. You're in service to your country.
Right.
Okay? But they have twisted things in such a way where people don't realize that they're now mercenaries in uniform. Okay.
So what do you say to the black community that's watching this network? Is there any advice you want to give to them as far as how to live their lives?
Well, there are plenty of advice that I would like to share, and one thing I would like to say,
share as much of it as possible,
is to invest time to read the Community Economic Development Plan of 1993.
Okay.
The Economic Development Plan of 1993.
What does the Community Economic Plan of 1993 consist of?
The Community Economic Development Plan of 1993 was my response to being challenged by why is it that all black organizations that are worth anything, that are trying to do something significant in the interest of alleviating the problems and the consequences of white supremacy, how come they ain't got no money? How come they're all broke? How come they're all begging? I mean, every damn one of them.
Can I borrow $1?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you $5. Okay. Yay! So, but the idea is I realized that, wait a minute, how come we're all broke? How come we don't have any money? Okay.
What is your solution to this?
That's what I'm trying to get to. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay. So anyway, my brother. So I decided that, wait a minute, there's got to be a way of addressing this that will speak to the problem. I'm a problem solver. I think it's very important not only to have the intelligence of analyzing a problem or detecting a problem or recognizing a problem. If you're smart enough to do that, I think you also should be smart enough to come up with a solution. Okay? It may not be the solution. It may not even be the best solution.
Right.
But you should be able to come up with something that people could use to address the problem, to change the problem somewhat, to impact it somewhat, either a little bit more, or a lot. Okay? So it's not just good enough for me to talk about what the problems are. I have committed myself to coming up with solutions as well. So the solution to the problem of black homes and families and organizations and institutions, et cetera, that are committed to us, white people are not going to give organizations, institutions that are committed to correcting a problem that they're creating, that they want us to have. They're not going to donate money. They're not going to give money. They're not going to give grants to an organization that's really addressing the problem of empowering and correcting the problem that white supremacy has created. They're not going to do that. So, and they shouldn't do it.
Do you have any companies do you have any websites or any companies to where you would want all these people to flock around to receive your valuable knowledge and your help to get somewhere? In direct answer to your question, and on our way back to the Atlanta child murder situation, it is www.edcuinc.com. edcuinc.com stands for Economic Development Centers Unlimited Incorporated. Okay.
And to read up, if you don't have anything else to do, about a little bit more about me, Emmett Abati Doe, you can either put that in a search engine, or you can look at ontherealside.com. Ontherealside.com.
And for more extended clips and more detail about what went on therealside.com.
Ontherealside.com. Okay. So the Community Economic Development Plan of 1993 is a solution. And the EDCUINC is a physical manifestation and representation of that concept. Okay? So I was waiting around hoping that some organization, some black leader would have the balls, and I hope we can get away with saying that, to stand up and begin to bring solutions to their community, as opposed to more of the same, which is get an education, get a good job, and stay out of trouble. Okay? Those prescriptions have not worked for us, because there are no jobs for us. There are no jobs for us anymore. And I don't know whether you've noticed it, but if you're driving around any major metropolitan center, and Houston in particular, you see all this economic activity with something missing. And what's missing is a black man working. That's what's missing. With all this economic activity, with all this construction, with all this federal money, with all this local money, with all this state money, you don't see any black men employed. And that's deliberate. The American business establishment, in cahoots with the government, has decided that black people are going to be driven out of the economic structure of society. And we're being replaced by people from all over the world, but specifically from South America. Okay, as you well should have enough sense to recognize. But we've been brainwashed into thinking that our children and our young people and our men can't qualify for jobs because they can't pass the drug test. Well, that's nonsense. White people have always used more drugs than black people. Okay? And you can't tell me these Mexicans that are coming up from South America, didn't come up smoking grass, and smoking grass and using everything they can use right now. But it seems like the only people that are excluded because of their drug involvement, and the only ones that can't seem to pass a drug test, et cetera, happens to be people that look like me and you. So we need to understand what the game is, but we also have to understand that if in fact a decision has been made to systematically exclude us from the economic activity of America. That's a job, that's employment that someone else gives us. Then we have to use the intelligence of a P. And certainly an ant's got more intelligence than we've demonstrated, because we continue to depend on the people who have created the problem to solve our problem, instead of standing up, finding out where our backbones and our balls are, and solving the problem for ourselves and young people who are coming behind us. And this is something that we have not done. Adults my age should be ashamed that we have allowed this situation to impact and to destroy the lives of millions, and that is the basis that they have used to incarcerate 2 million. More than 2 million.
As much as this guy, Mr. Emmett Abati Doe, is explaining to you, you listen to it and you absorb it. You understand, Houston? As well as I.
So, check out the Community Economic Development Plan. It's at the edcuyinc.com website. And you can also put in the Community Economic Development Plan of 1993, and it'll come up there. It'll come up as well, and you can download it, etc. So let's get back to the Atlanta child murders.
Okie dokie.
And let's understand where we are now. We now have a task force that's been created in response to police who had police experience and knowledge,
Right.
etc., who were going to begin to look into and to expose and to catch who the killers were.
Yes, sir.
And to stop that from happening, they created this task force. And then, interestingly enough, they created something called the list. And the list happens to be the name of a very, very important book that I encourage you to find and to read if you're interested in more specific details of this horrific event that's
Right.
still going on. I mean, they don't,
Right.
Black kids haven't stopped disappearing. Black kids haven't stopped being killed, etc., mysteriously. They have just stopped reporting it.
So there's a guy that you made me aware about in the backstage. You made me aware of this guy that they locked away that you are absolutely convinced that this guy did not do anything.
He was a scapegoat.
This guy,
And it was done under the watch of a very dear friend of mine who was the mayor of Atlanta at that time, Maynard Jackson. But now I've got to speak the truth, even if it doesn't reflect well on somebody I really admired and loved. But that's exactly what happened. So this task force began to say which victims that showed up dead fit who they thought was the pattern of the killers of the children.
Right.
Now you got to get this, folks. You got to get this. There were many bodies, many young bodies, but there was an arbitrary mechanism to decide which bodies made it on the list. It could be the same MO, asphyxiation, rape, mutilation,
Jesus
but
Christ.
but that person didn't make it on the list. Some made the list, some didn't make the list, and no one ever could explain what the reason, what the rationale was,
right,
to do this. So the book that I'm suggesting that really chronicles this story, and if it wasn't for these two men, Jeff Pugh and Chet Detlinger, that we wouldn't know how bad this situation was, and I wouldn't be able to bring this information to your attention today. I happened to had the opportunity to interview and to have 3 programs that soon will be aired here, I believe, that were done with these men and with mothers, a mother of one of the victims, and with the police chief,
Right.
and et cetera, and the lawyer for Wayne Bertram Williams is the gentleman who was framed.
Okay.
Sacrificial lamb. This was a 98-pound weakling who was basically a nerd. Okay, he was basically a nerd, but he was a young, up-and-coming nerd that happened to have created his own. He lived with his mother and father. They were middle class, so he didn't come from an abused family, or was he deprived emotionally, or he was just an average middle class black kid in Atlanta.
Right.
But he was a little bit more of a middle class black kid in Atlanta. Wayne Williams had guts. He had vision. He had ambition. And he started a radio show. He had a radio station that broadcast about 7 blocks in radius from his home.
Yeah.
He was elected to various positions of leadership in his school. Okay, and in fact, check this out, folks. This young man was so on his way to becoming somebody who might one day have perhaps even been the mayor of Atlanta, that when he was sworn in as student body president, guess who the one it was that administered the oath?
Right. The oath was administered.
The oath was administered by none other than Andrew Young.
Okay. Who is Andrew Young? You're
Now,
making these insinuations that,
That's not an insinuation, that's a fact.
we need these people to understand
Okay.
in which we speak.
Andrew
We need to
Young.
breathe life into this.
Andrew Young was one of the top trusted lieutenants of Dr. Martin Luther King. Andrew Young was on the balcony when you see all that theater that was going on the balcony around the assassination of Dr. King. Andrew Young was one of the people. And Andrew Young also became the ambassador to the United Nations from the United States.
Okay.
Okay?
Very important guy.
And he also became the mayor of Atlanta. Okay? So, and he was very significant in SCLC. That's who Andrew Young was. But the point, Andrew Young was back in that day, Andrew Young's claim to fame was he was very influential and very close to Dr. King. And you will see Andrew Young, if you see Dr. King within 5 feet, you'll see Andrew Young, because he was like Jesse. He didn't miss. If there was a camera around, they were there.
He would have known.
They were there. So the point is that this young man had drawn attention to himself sufficient to have people see him as an up-and-coming, okay? And they wanted to cultivate him. They wanted to sport him. They wanted to groom him, okay?
Quick question.
Yes.
All right, everything we just spoke about, why is it important that they know this story now? Why is this important? Because I don't want these people getting lackadaisical on us and start, doing the thing the human brain does. And we don't want that.
Well, I can't tell you
Why do they need to know?
What's important to you, but I can tell you what's important that surrounds you. And what surrounds us is something called white domination, white supremacy. That surrounds us. We are immersed in that. And we have gotten to a place of numbness, of spiritual, intellectual numbness, that we're like someone saying to a fish, you're in water. And the fish legitimately can ask the question, what water? We move and we live in an ocean of air. But you say, what ocean?
With oxygen.
But if the air wasn't here, you'd know real quick, because you'd be dead, okay? So we are immersed in an environment and in an atmosphere that's so ubiquitous that we don't even see it. We don't even know it's there. And that's called white domination, white supremacy.
What about, how do you, is this something you should fight? I mean, we're acknowledging it. I mean, how do you make us feel better about being submersed in white domination?
Well,
what do you recommend that,
if you're satisfied with being a boy and remaining a boy, if you're satisfied in being a girl and remaining a girl, because that's what they would call us. They would say to a grown woman, they would say to your mama, girl. They would say to a woman who was in her 70s, they would call her girl. They would call a man of my age, boy. Okay? Mm-hmm. Because a boy and a girl are powerless. Are powerless. And we as a people have almost agreed with that.
Right.
We've agreed with that because we act like boys. We act like girls because we have not moved toward independence and self-sufficiency. So if you don't act like a man, why should someone treat you as a man? It irritates me, and I'm sure it amuses white people, how you see and hear black people talk bad, but they are not doing anything to support their independence. They're not doing anything to generate income. They're not doing anything to take them off the reservation, to take them off of the plantation.
What do you say to the white people that do help the black community? What do you say to those crew of people?
Well, I'm not that concerned about them, and not using a cliche, but many of my friends are white. And I say the same thing that I'm saying now, I have said to them. And because if they know and if they understand the truth of what I'm speaking, and if they are truly in support of correcting this situation, I don't need to say anything to them.
Okay. So thanks for whatever. And we got to get these black people to self-sufficiency so they can grow and be something.
Well,
I don't want to just tell them there's a problem. There's a problem.
I think we're already
fix it.
We're already something. We're already somebody. We need to act like it. If you're a man, you need to act like it. If you're a woman, you need to act like it. And it is not about how many women you can bed or how much hair you can buy, okay? And how ridiculous them shoes you can put on. It is not about that. That's not being a woman, and that's not being a man. We have to be able to take the action that's going to make things and address things to make it less of a problem for generations to come and those who are coming behind me. So this message that I'm delivering to you is designed and intended for you to wake up! We're in bad condition as a people. We're on the verge of annihilation. We're an endangered species. And part of my message is found in my production of PMIA, the movie. PMIA, the movie. And you can view that on YouTube. And sometimes it shows up as Hugo Chavez, PMIA, the movie.
Right.
But you'll get a better and a more complete view of the danger that we're trifling, that we're playing with. We're playing with our lives. But it's very difficult for us to see that we're losing in terms of our numbers. It's very difficult to identify because we got all these black people that they've allowed to come in, and there's a quota on how many black people can come into America, okay? So when you see black people that are in America that are not PMIA, and PMIA, it's important to know, are the people made in America, the descendants, the direct descendants of those captured and enslaved prisoners of wars that they called slaves.
Okay.
We were enslaved. We were never slaves. We were enslaved. And we need to understand that we have an identity. We're not immigrants. We're not foreigners. And we're damn sure ain't refugees like they laid on those people that they abused and misused in New Orleans based on the FEMA disaster. That was not a natural event. That was a man-made event, okay?
How was it a man-made event?
It was a man-made event because the flooding was created. The flooding was caused by the demolition of the canal walls in New Orleans. I've got a map, and if you just take some time and investigate, you can go look at Spike Lee's When the Levees Broke, okay? The levees didn't break. The language is kind of tricky. There's a difference between the language of a levee and a canal wall. But when you look at the various sites that the canal walls were breached or the levees broke, you will see a pattern that could not have been created by a natural event. In fact, when Katrina the storm passed New Orleans, it was a Category 2. New Orleans dodged the bullet of the hurricane, but there were forces that were planning on using a natural event to mask a disaster where they could transform New Orleans and Louisiana. Louisiana and New Orleans are not the same.
Okay.
As a result of the disaster caused by forces of agents and agencies and that unknown, but that was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made, and you could tell it was a man-made disaster based on the lack of response.
Right.
The lack of response. And the other thing I'll encourage you to do to understand how this was planned,
right,
that this was planned, is to take a look at a tourist map of the Superdome. Take a look at the tourist map of the Superdome. And it is part of a complex. It is part of a complex. And we heard about the suffering and the gnashing of teeth of the people trapped in the Superdome. They were trapped in the Superdome because there were armed killers called policemen and National Guard that kept them. They were imprisoned in the Superdome. They weren't there in the Superdome because there was no other options, because you can walk right across the parking lot of the Superdome and there's a hotel, there's a 4-star hotel that never lost power. There's a 4-star hotel that never had issues with water or food. And they could have walked out of that situation had they been allowed to walk out of that situation. Okay. But they were deliberately kept there. And look, I have a military background, and I know that the United States Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard have the resources to have provided every single need that people so-called trapped, if they were in fact trapped, by helicopter, they could have brought in every imaginable resource and set it down so that there would have been never a need for anybody to die from dehydration, never a need for anyone to have died from exposure, never a need for anyone to just die from the stress, the absolute madness of what they were subjected to. And certainly they could have dropped a pallet of toilet paper. Yeah. So there's no item from food to water to toilet paper, that the government did not have the ability to provide those people within hours, including just lifting them out. If they were isolated and there was a sea of sharks and a sea of alligators around them, they could have picked those people up by helicopter. They have the technology. They have the equipment to have done that. And as you saw, this phony Lone Ranger called General Honore, who at the last minute comes in with guns blazing, looking like Wyatt Earp and John Wayne, and everybody's, clapping. I mean, it was theater, folks. It was theater. And it's very important that we not get bullshitted by what we see on TV.
Right.
Okay? So, can I wind up?
Wind down. Tell us about PMI. People Made in America.
PMIA, People Made in America.
America, the movie. This is why you should watch People Made in America, people. It's real.
Thank you. We need to understand that we've got two choices. Really, two choices. We can either continue to pretend that we're Americans, because we're not. We're descendants of prisoners of war. And many of you young people have never heard of Dred Scott because you've been miseducated. Everything that you've been exposed to has been BS or lies. And BS and lies are kind of like the same thing. But most of the things that you've been exposed to, most of the things that you've been taught, most of the things that you've been led to believe does not work for you. It doesn't work for our people. It has not worked for us. It has not worked for our people. Because we're into this bling bling thing, that getting the bling bling is going to be the answer to our problems. Well, how come it wasn't the answer to Michael Jackson's problem? How come bling bling wasn't the answer to O.J. Simpson's problem? And O.J. Simpson didn't do it. 2 trained gorillas couldn't have pulled that off, and nobody hear nothing. So that was BS also.
People Made in America, the movie. You better watch it. Good programming.
And in closing, I hope you have heard enough about the Atlanta child murders to at least begin to question whether or not the man who has been now in prison over 40 years for a crime that he maintains to this day he did not commit. And I know that Soledad O'Brien and some of those other talking heads have constantly brought this subject back up, but that's all part of the propaganda campaign. That's all part of the psychological warfare against those who do remember, against those who were alert to realize that, wait a minute, something didn't make sense. And let me leave you guys with this. There was something like 28 people who made the list, and Wayne Williams, this 98-pound weakling, who was supposedly took a body out of his family station wagon, dead weight, right, that weighed more than he did, and dragged the body to the edge of the railing of an overpass and threw it over the rail, and they had a stakeout at the bottom of the bridge, and they heard a splash.
No.
They heard a splash. This boy was convicted because somebody heard or claimed that they heard a splash. But they didn't close the trap. They didn't arrest him. They didn't do anything. 3 days later, a body washes up
In Atlanta.
on the Chattahoochee where this splash was heard. And they connected this body 3 days later with what they heard and didn't do nothing about, and connected Wayne Williams with the body that washed up 3 days later. Now, folks, you talk about a drama, you talk about a science fiction. I mean, that's so outlandish, it's not funny. But it gets worse, because they convicted him of killing 2 adults. Listen to this. They convicted him of killing 2 adults. But Wayne Bertrand Williams is known the world over as the Atlanta child murderer. But he was tried and convicted of 2 adults. Now, it gets better, folks. After his conviction, by some extraordinary, unexplained, completely absurd and preposterous miscarriage of the very law itself, they charged Wayne Williams with the death of 27 victims on that list and wrote them off as he killed them. So these cases are all solved. They are all closed because he did them all.
And so he's locked up for no reason.
Oh, he's locked up for a reason, because the ones who were really doing the killings, the ones that were really involved in the rituals and the crap that was going on with these children and the pedophilia ring of homosexuals and all kinds of stuff that was going on in Atlanta that involved high officials and just plain, folks that, that were half crazy, and they love to brutalize children. They love to sodomize children.
Oh, Jesus.
And the greatest thrill must be for them to sodomize a child and strangle them while they're ejaculating or something. I don't know what the deal is, but the mothers have asked the government to try Wayne Williams for the death of their son. To try Wayne Williams for the death of their son. And they said no need to, because he's the one responsible. That case is closed. I mean, this is crazy. This doesn't even happen in the movies.
Gotcha.
And the last piece of this, which is very important, is that Chief Louis Graham, who was a member of the task force, who was an investigator on the task force, who became the chief of police of DeKalb County, which is right next door to Atlanta. You wouldn't know whether you're in Atlanta or you're in DeKalb, but they're separate political entities. And he became chief of police. And one of the first things that he did when he became chief of police is to open up for the cases that were in his jurisdiction. And Chief Graham, you will hear on the program that we're going to air, stated categorically that he has never believed that Wayne Williams killed anybody. That is the statement of the police chief. That he had never believed that Wayne Williams killed anyone, and that his investigation...
His name is Wayne Williams?
Wayne Bertrand
Williams
Williams
was accused of murdering all these kids.
Accused of murdering all these kids.
And he didn't do it.
And the police chief who was on the task force that investigated, et cetera, said that he didn't believe that Wayne Williams killed anybody.
Okay.
And he reopened the cases.
So how long has he been locked up concerning this?
Well, he was convicted in 1983.
1983.
And he's been in prison, treated like an animal since 1983.
83. How 83, 90, 83, 93, 93, 2003. He been 30 years? 40 years this guy's been locked up, and so this is a free Mr. Bertram effort.
Well, it's to bring justice
to a situation,
to these children. You understand?
Okay.
I've got 5 grandbabies, and the suffering, and you're going to see photographs of the parents and the fathers and those who love these children, because we don't get it sometimes, because they're just numbers.
Right.
but they were people.
Okay.
There was somebody's baby who didn't come home that night. There was somebody's darling that his private parts were mutilated. Okay? There was somebody's darling that they knew that his last minutes were in terror. Okay? And that no one has been held accountable for who really did it. And the last piece, you'll hear commentary by the attorney of Wayne Williams, whose name is Michael Jackson. And also, to give you a fast-forward update, within a year after Police Chief Louis Graham of DeKalb County, Georgia, made those statements on my program, and he had made them publicly in other places,
Right.
they came after him and forced him to resign as chief of police.
Okay.
And the investigations that he characterized on my program
Right.
as encouraging, that he was encouraged by the investigation that he had reopened to find the real killers, and forces that were protecting persons and people unknown and unnamed yet stepped in and stopped that investigation. But it was the second black law enforcement officer that had been stopped from investigating who really was the killer. The killers, plural, in what is known the world over as the Atlanta child murders.
People Made in America, PMIA, the movie, is phenomenal. Check it out. Check your local listings. Thanks to Channel 17 HMS, Mr. Abati Doe is the man.
Thank you, and thank you.